I'm the unsilent majority, big mouth.
Joining us as she does on a Thursday is New South Wales Liberal Senator Fierravanti-Wells. Connie, good morning.
Good morning, Stephen.
Connie, the New South Wales government has extended the Greater Sydney lockdown to the 28th of August. Look, I am philosophically opposed to lockdowns, but even if you think that lockdowns are the right way to go, there must be a real concern here for areas like, particularly where you're based on the South Coast, the northern beaches where you live, the Central Coast, and areas that are largely not part of Greater Sydney and have largely been spared from coronavirus. They're still in lockdown and still suffering the impacts.
Absolutely, and this is why, whereas there was disquiet before, Stephen, I think that this disquiet is now growing to red-hot anger in some cases. I've mentioned to you before, I've noticed a greater stridency in the emails that I receive. That stridency is really palpable. It's very critical of the lockdowns and the long-term effects. It's very critical of this broad sweep approach that is clearly a target of eradication. And I think that's really what it comes down to. I'm concerned that the language that is being used by the Premier and Premiers is because it's about getting to that zero number when she says that we can end this lockdown. Now, it's clear that the virus will not be eliminated, so it really does beg the question of this catch-22 situation that we're in.
What is the mentality here, though? Because, I mean, we're talking about your party, and I know a lot of the individuals in the government, as do you, and we know that it's not just opposition people that are critical of this. There are people within Cabinet in New South Wales that don't support the government's stance here. What's driving this?
Well, I think that we're now seeing a situation where, yes, medical expert and medical advice is very important, but it is advice, and ultimately the people who are in government are responsible to the people, and therefore whether it's a Targi advice or the advice of the Chief Medical Officer, etc., ultimately it's the political decision makers that wear the political responsibility of their actions. And advice is important, but so are other factors, and those other factors clearly include economic factors, they include social factors, they include a whole range of different things, and that's where I think that balance, and that needs to be that appropriate balance, and I think that increasingly the anger is growing, particularly here in New South Wales, that balance is not right.
You've been particularly critical of a lack of parliamentary oversight and a lot of decisions made through delegated authority. At least at a federal level, Parliament is still meeting, and even in Victoria during their lockdowns, Parliament still met on limited basis. In New South Wales, Parliament almost doesn't exist anymore. I mean, this has got to be a concern for everybody.
Well, of course it is, but more to the point, my criticisms were the fact that under the Biosecurity Act, the delegated legislation that is made under the Biosecurity Act is predominantly not subject to disallowance. So that means that the actions that were taken pursuant to that, and of course that has a cascading effect to states as well. So once that biosecurity order is in place, the states make their own orders through their own delegated legislation framework. The point is, yes, Parliament is meeting, but parliaments around Australia have not considered these measures before they were imposed, and that's the issue. It's not just the meeting, it's actually the fact that parliaments, many of these measures that have been imposed were not subject to parliamentary scrutiny.
Now, one of the biggest concerns I have is that, Year 12 students are now going to be allowed to return to school in the middle of next month, but, we're hearing some horror stories about the impacts that these lockdowns and the fact that kids aren't going to school is having on younger people. But I want to focus on business for a moment. The federal government has been largely criticised for the amount of money that it's had to spend, and look, I'm one of the first person to say, government's spending money hand over fist is a problem, but the federal government's been caught between a rock and a hard place here. They've announced again, billions of dollars in assistance packages again. They really haven't had any choice.
Well, that's right. The more premiers lock down, the more need for support. And it does beg the question that knowing that federal support is available probably makes it easier for the states to make the decision to lock down, knowing that the federal government will come in to assist.
Yeah, I mean, I feel for the individuals because, I mean, businesses who have copped a 30% fall in revenue are going to receive this extra support. But, you know, I mean, even that's an onerous thing. I spoke to my accountant last week who has devoted this entire week just to try and get some of these business grants for some of the businesses that he represents. And, you know, we're talking about small businesses that this is just another onerous impost on them in the hope of trying to get some money out of the government to keep themselves alive because of what government has put them through. It's one of these, it's a downward spiral that we don't seem to be able to get out of.
Well, this is the whole point, and this is where these draconian measures that have been imposed that we've just been talking about, liberties have been taken away. Business cannot continue under these stop-start conditions with a little bit here and a little bit there. The economic consequences will take years to recover from. And as I think Adam Crichton has so correctly set out, yes, it's important. The support is very, very important, but time will tell what the economic cost will be. And continually Reserve banks making money, if we can put it in those terms, will have long-term effects. The debt and money printing will come to a point where it cannot be sustained in the future, and more people are worried about that because it's future generations that are going to have to pay that debt.
I just want to touch on the protests that happened in Sydney last weekend. And whilst I'm of the position that whether you like the rules and the health orders and the various restrictions that are put in place, you've got to obey the law. You've got to, the rule of law is important. So I was against the protests in that sense. But the rhetoric from government about the people that have that protested. And look, there's no doubt that in any protest there's going to be a bunch of lunatics and buffheads. But the average Australian who is just afraid of the fact that they don't know where their next paycheck's going to come from, whether their business is going to survive, whether their kids are going to be able to cope with these lockouts, the language from governments calling these people buffheads and criminals and encouraging Australians to dob each other in, this is a dangerous rabbit hole that I don't think we can get out of now.
Well, Stephen, I think you're correct. Whatever one thinks of protests, I think you do need to understand the underlying frustration, that sense of helplessness, and hopelessness in some cases, and feeling of abandon that many of these ordinary Australians feel. I agree with you. I think that most of the people who did protest were ordinary Australians. Of course, there were some thugs and other people amongst them, but I think it's important to understand what's driving ordinary Australians to go out into the streets and protest them. And I think dismissing them will only risk their resolve hardening and others joining them. And so particularly clearly that insecurity that results when livelihoods are taken away means that people will take action, and some will be peaceful and some will be less peaceful because of that sense of frustration and helplessness that they do feel.
No two ways about it. Connie, great to talk to you. We'll catch up again next week.
Thanks a lot.
Fierravanti-Wells, New South Wales Liberal Senator, back with us next week, 7:20.
NRL and laughs for your weekend with the Continuous Call team.
Normally I get in before David, so on occasions I've actually gone and got the physical barriers and barricaded his car park.
Well, you won't get out and move them?
No. He'd probably do another lap hoping they're gone by the time he gets back.
Thanks to Domain Electrical, Autoco Mechanical and Bridgestone Select, All States Towing, Brodberger and Melaganis Edwards Johnson. The Harvey Norman Electrical Superstore Continuous Call team every weekend on